Bays said he would become a monster. They whispered that Scar's blood would rise again. They swore the Pride Lands would burn the day Kovu touched the throne. But what if the lion they feared most became the king they needed most? What if the next great king wasn't born in glory, but in doubt, rejection, and fire? The wind howled across the Pride Lands. The night Kovu stood alone at the edge of the cliff, staring at Pride Rock glowing under moonlight. That stone carried Legends Mufasa's strength, Simba's redemption, Kiara's hope. And now, every eye turned toward him, Kovu. The outsider cub raised on revenge. The heir of darkness. The lion marked by Scar's shadow. He never asked for that shadow. From the moment he opened his eyes, he carried a name heavier than stone. In the Outlands, he was told he would finish Scar's legacy. In the Pride Lands, he was watched as if betrayal lived in his breath. He belonged nowhere. And that is where his rise truly began. Because greatness is not born from comfort. It is forged where you stand alone. After the war ended and peace was chosen over hate, Kovu remained in the Pride Lands not as a king. Not yet even as a prince in their hearts, but as a test. A living reminder of the past. Some lions accepted him because Kiara loved him. Others bowed their heads, but kept their distance. He felt it in every silence. He saw it in every guarded glance. When Simba welcomed him, Tao lingered in the air like dust after a storm. Kovu could have demanded respect. He could have ruled through fear, silencing whispers with strength. Scar would have done that. But Kovu made a different choice. He listened. He walked among the herds, not above them. He trained with the guards until his muscles burned. He defended the borders without announcing his victories. When disputes rose between predators and prey, he didn't roar first. He asked questions. The Pride Lands watched. A drought came that year, cruel and unforgiving. Rivers shrank. Grass turned brittle. Hunger made tempers sharp. Some blamed the sky. Others blamed fate. A few blamed Kovu. Ever since Scar's blood returned, one elder muttered, "The land suffers again." The words reached him. They hurt. Instead of anger, he chose action. He led hunting patrols farther than ever before. He negotiated with neighboring territories for shared water access. He rationed food fairly even, taking less for himself. When cubs cried from hunger, he sat beside them, promising the rains would return. Kiara watched him carefully. One evening under fading sunlight, she asked softly, "Why don't you defend yourself when they accuse you?" Kovu stared at the horizon. Because a king who spends his time proving he isn't a villain forgets to become a leader. True. The drought broke weeks later with a storm so fierce it flooded the plains. Lions scrambled. Dens filled with water. Panic spread. And in the chaos, Kovu didn't hesitate. He climbed the highest ridge and roared commands that cut through thunder. He organized rescues. He pulled cubs from rising waters. He shielded elders with his own body. When lightning struck near Pride Rock, he stood firm, directing lions to safety. By dawn, the storm had passed. The Pride Land stood shaken but alive. And something had changed. Not because he demanded loyalty, because he earned it. Simba saw it too. The way lions looked at Kovu Nonat with suspicion, but with trust. Not because of Kiara, because of him. But destiny tests those closest to greatness. Eroge. Pride from the far north invaded without warning, sensing weakness after the storm. They were fierce, organized, merciless. Their leader challenged Simba directly, mocking his age, questioning his strength. Chew. The challenge echoed across the plains. Simba stepped forward. But before he could answer, Kovu moved beside him. "Let me." It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't pride. It was readiness. The battle was brutal. claws flashed. Dust choked the air. The Rogue King was larger, heavier, ruthless. He taunted Kovu with Scar's name, trying to awaken anger. "You fight like him," the enemy sneered. Kovu felt the old fire spark inside. But he remembered the drought, the storm, the cubs, the choice, and instead of rage, he fought with control, with discipline, with purpose. When he finally pinned the Rogue King to the ground, he didn't deliver a killing blow. He stepped back. "Leave," Kovu ordered. "And do not return. Mercy. Strength without cruelty." The evading pride retreat shook. The Pride Lands erupted in a roar that shook the sky, not of fear, but of pride. That night, under a sky clear and endless, Simba stood with Kovu at Pride Rock. "You are ready?" Simba said quietly. Kovu's chest tightened. "Ready for what?" Simba looked over the kingdom. "To be the next great king." Silence filled the space between them. Kovu had once dreamed of proving himself. Now that the moment stood before him, it felt heavier than any shadow. "I'm not Mufasa," he said. "No," Simba replied. "You're not. And that's exactly why you're ready. Because the next great king wouldn't rule from legend. He would rule from experience, from mistakes, from choices." And Kovu had made his choice every single day to be better than the fear surrounding his name. When the ceremony came, the Pride Lands gathered at the base of Pride Rock. Not out of obligation, not out of tradition, out of belief. Kiara stood beside him, eyes shining not because she loved him, but because she respected him. As Kovu stepped forward, the wind rose gently, carrying echoes of the past. Not Scar's whisper, but something stronger. A new beginning. Who looked out over the land that once doubted him. The land he had protected. The land he would now lead. And when he roared, it wasn't a roar of dominance. It was a promise. A promise that no lion would be judged by blood. A promise that strength would never again become cruelty. A promise that the Pride Lands would stand united, not in fear, but in hope. They once feared Scar's shadow would rise again. Instead, something brighter rose from those ashes. The next great king. It's not born from perfection, not shaped by prophecy, but forged in fire. And chosen by the heart of the kingdom itself. The roar that crowned him did not end his trial. Because wearing the crown is easy for a day. Carrying it when the ground cracks beneath your paws, that is where true kings are made. Have you ever seen a ruler celebrated at sunrise and questioned by sunset? Have you ever watched a lion rise to the throne only to realize the throne itself is the battlefield? The morning after Kovu became king, the Pride Lands looked peaceful. Golden light washed over the plains, herds moved calmly, and Pride Rock stood tall, as if history approved. But peace can be fragile. Whispers still lingered in quiet corners. Not loud enough to challenge him. Not bold enough to rebel. But present. He fights well. Some said, but can he rule long? He shows mercy, others muttered. But mercy invites danger. Kovu heard none of it directly, yet he felt it. A king always feels the heartbeat of his land. Kiara stood beside him, not just as queen, but as his equal. She noticed the tension in his shoulders. "You don't have to prove yourself every hour," she told him softly. "Yes," Kovu replied, eyes scanning the horizon. "I do." Because Orchestral meant more than strength in battle. It meant decisions that no claw could solve. The first test came quietly. Food shortages returned in a smaller but dangerous wave. Neighboring territories demanded stricter borders. Predators accused prey of hiding resources. Old divisions threatened to reopen. Some advisors urged Kovu to tighten control, to rule with sharper authority, to show dominance before weakness spread. The easy path. The Scar path, Kovu called a gathering instead. Under the wide open sky, he brought together herd leaders, lionesses, scouts, elders. Not to command, but to listen. Voices rose in anger. Accusations flew like sparks. The tension was thick enough to choke on. And then Kovu stepped forward. "If we fight each other," he said calmly, "we become our own enemy. This land survived drought and invasion because we stood together. We will not undo that with fear." It wasn't a roar. It was steady strength. He reorganized hunting zones fairly, created rotating patrols to protect shared resources, sent messengers of peace to neighboring lands instead of threats. Some called it risky. Weeks later, it proved wise. Trade routes opened. Alliances strengthened. The Pride Lands didn't just survive, they stabilized. But destiny doesn't test a king only through hunger or politics. It tests his heart. One night, a young lion challenged Kovu publicly. Not an outsider. Not an enemy. One of their own. "You rule because you married into the throne," the young warrior snapped. "Not because you earned it." Gasps rippled through the pride. Years ago, that accusation would have cut Kovu deeply. It would have awakened insecurity, maybe even anger. Now, he simply walked down from Pride Rock and faced the lion eye to eye. "You're right about one thing," Kovu said evenly. "I married into this pride, but I earned my place long before that." The young lion lowered into a battle stance, demanding a test of strength. Kovu accepted. The fight was swift but controlled. He disarmed the challenger without humiliating him, pinning him firmly yet carefully. "I don't rule because I cannot be beaten," Kovu said quietly so all could hear. "I rule because when I win, I choose not to crush." He released him. The message was clear. Strength guided by restraint. That night, even the loudest doubters fell silent. Seasons passed. Cubs were born into a kingdom no longer divided by the shadow of Scar. They grew hearing stories, not of betrayal, but of unity. Kovu made sure of that. He never erased history, but he refused to let it define the future. Then came the greatest test of all. Simba grew older. The once unstoppable king moved slower, his golden mane touched with silver. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Simba stood beside Kovu overlooking the plains. "You've surpassed me," Simba admitted quietly. Kovu shook his head. "I learned from you." Simba smiled faintly. "No. You learned from your choices." When Simba finally stepped back completely, there was no fear in the Pride Lands, no uncertainty, no divided loyalties. Because the next great king had already proven himself long before the title settled fully on his shoulders. Years later, when another young cub asked, "Were you always brave?" Kovu looked down at him and answered honestly, "No." "Were you always strong?" "No." "Then, how did you become king?" Kovu looked across the wide golden plains, where lions and herds lived in balance, where no roar echoed with tyranny, where no shadow ruled the past. "I chose," he said softly. "Every single day, I chose who I wanted to be." That was the true rise. Not the ceremony, not the crown, not the royal, but the daily battle against fear, anger, doubt, and legacy. The world once believed Scar's blood would poison the throne forever. Instead, that same bloodline produced a king who proved something greater than destiny. Your past may shape you, but your choices define you. In us, the sun set behind Pride Rock, casting long golden lights over a united kingdom. One truth stood taller than stone itself. The next great king was never the one born without darkness, who was the one who faced it and ruled anyway.